Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going to get into a story that is just stunning in its speed and its cynicism, really. We're looking at the British annexation of Sindh in 1843.
It's an incredible case study in how imperial motivations can shift on a dime. I mean, you start in 1809 with something called the Treaty of Eternal Friendship.
Right, eternal French. It sounds so solid, so permanent.
Exactly. But just 34 years later, the top British official on the ground, a man we'll talk a lot about, calls the whole conquest, and this is a direct quote, a very advantageous, useful, humane piece of rascality.
Humane rascality. I mean, that phrase alone tells you everything. It's
Yeah.
the entire story in 2 words.
It really is. And that's our mission today, isn't it? To unpack how you get from A to B, from eternal friendship to humane rascality. We're going to trace the sources and see how this initial fear of, Napoleon somehow morphs into this aggressive grab for trade routes.
And then how that spirals into this naked military takeover, all fueled by this paranoia about Russia, the great game, and maybe most importantly, this desperate need for the British to save face.
Right, because that's how these things so often happen. It's never just one reason. It starts as a strategic necessity, or at least that's the excuse. Then, once the doors open, commerce comes rushing in, and that leads to political control.
Okay, so before we dive into that timeline, let's just quickly set the scene. Who are the rulers of Sindh at this time? Who are the British dealing with?
We're talking about the Talpuras. They were a powerful Baluch tribe, and they'd taken control of the region back in the 1780s, so they were well established.
And their leadership structure was pretty interesting, wasn't it?
It was. The man who led the conquest was Mir Fatah Ali Khan. But after him, the rule was actually shared between his 4 brothers. They were known collectively as the Char Yar.
Which literally means the 4 friends.
The 4 friends.
Oh.
And they call themselves the Emirs of Sindh, which just means lords. So you've got this a shared leadership, a council of rulers.
So this wasn't some weak, fractured state just waiting for a takeover.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Far from it. The sources are really clear on this. They were effective. They were expansionists themselves. I mean, they captured key places like Amarkal from Jodhpur. And crucially, they controlled the big commercial centers.
Like Karachi.
Karachi, Shikarpur, Bukhara, these were the jewels. They held the mouth of the Indus River. They were a sovereign power and a strong one. And that's a really important fact to hold on to as we see how quickly this all unravels.
Okay, let's go back to the beginning then. Section 1. The initial contact, when the British weren't thinking about conquest at all. They just saw Sindh as a buffer zone.
Right, a shield.
Yeah.
And it's all about European politics being played out in Asia. While the Talpuras are consolidating their power, building the Char Yar system, the British are worried about one person.
Napoleon
Bonaparte. For decades, from the 1740s right up to around 1800, the big British fear was the French in South India. They were fighting Tipu Sultan, who was allied with the French.
Okay, so that was the Southern Front.
But once they dealt with that threat, the fear didn't just disappear. It just moved. It moved northwest. The whole British establishment became obsessed with this idea of an overland invasion.
The idea that Napoleon, having conquered most of Europe, would just keep going, march his armies through Persia, through Afghanistan, and right into India.
Exactly. And if you look at a map, Sindh is right there. It's the gateway. It's the geographical choke point. Suddenly, this place they hadn't cared much about becomes the absolute front line of imperial defense.
Not because of what was in Sindh, but just because of where it was on the map.
Purely geography. And so the governor-general at the time, Lord Minto Sirst, he launches this huge diplomatic offensive, a really sophisticated strategy.
What did that look like?
He sends envoys everywhere to build a wall of buffer states. Yeah. He sends Malcolm to Tehran to the Persian court. He sends Elphinstone to Kabul to negotiate with the Afghans.
And to Sindh.
And crucially for our story, he sends a man named Seaton, specifically to the emirs in Sindh.
So Sindh is being treated on the same level as Persia and Afghanistan. It's a key piece in this grand strategic puzzle.
A vital piece. And the result of Seaton's mission is the Treaty of Eternal Friendship in 1809.
That name is just so wonderfully ironic in hindsight.
It's perfect, isn't it? But at the time, its purpose was actually very narrow, very transactional. The emirs made one promise.
Which was?
They promised not to let the French settle in Sindh or even pass through it. That was it. In return, The British recognized their sovereignty and promised to stay out of their internal affairs.
Which seems like a pretty good deal for the emirs, really. They get formal recognition from this rising global power, and all they have to do is keep out a rival European power they probably didn't want there anyway.
It was a great deal at that moment.
Hmm.
They were independent allies. The British had, zero commercial demands. It was all geopolitics. But here's the catch.
There's always a catch.
The friendship, this eternal friendship, was entirely conditional. It depended on Napoleon being a threat. The moment that threat fades, well, the foundation of the relationship starts to crumble.
And we see that happen pretty quickly. Which brings us to the next phase, the transition away from geopolitics and towards, well, money.
Right. The French threat recedes, but the British don't just pack up and go home. Of course not. Instead, their entire motivation for being there begins to transform. The anxiety shifts from military threats to commercial ones.
And we can actually pinpoint this shift in the documents, can't we? Specifically, the treaty renewal in 1820.
Yes, this is fascinating. The agreement is updated, and now the emirs are forced to add a new clause. They have to promise to ban Americans from settling in Sindh.
Americans, not Russians or some other military power.
Americans.
Americans. And that tells you everything. Think about the timing. 1820. The Napoleonic Wars are over. The Great Game with Russia hasn't really kicked into high gear yet, so what's the big British fear in this little interim period?
Trade competition. Trade competition. The East India Company's monopoly. The Americans were, aggressive traders. They were all over Asia looking for new markets, trying to undercut the British.
So the British are using a geopolitical treaty with a sovereign state to fight their commercial rivals.
Precisely. They're turning the emirs from a military buffer into, like, an economic moat. It's a huge tell. It shows that commercial security is now the #1 priority.
But the real game changer wasn't banning other traders. It was the British realizing what Sindh itself had to offer.
This is the pivotal moment. It's the physical discovery of the Indus River as a massive economic asset.
They hadn't realized its potential before.
Not in the same way. They were focused on the land routes, the coast, but then their explorers and agents start mapping the river, and they have this eureka moment. They realize this incredible river system is a highway, a superhighway for trade and shipping deep into the heart of Central Asia.
It's cheap, it's fast, you can move huge amounts of goods.
Right. And suddenly, in the British mind, Sindh transforms. It's no longer just a buffer state you need to keep enemies out of. It's a prize, an economic engine you need to get into. The river became more valuable than the land.
And once that happens, the old treaties are basically worthless.
Totally insufficient. They need access. And they move fast. In 1832, the Governor-General, William Bentinck, sends in Colonel Pottinger, and his mission is clear. Get a new deal, a commercial deal.
So what does this 1832 commercial treaty actually say?
Well, the emirs are under immense pressure, but they try to negotiate. They agreed to let English merchants and travelers pass through their territory and use the Indus for trade.
But they tried to keep some control, right?
They did. They managed to get a clause that allowed them to charge a fixed duty, a toll, on the goods passing through. They were trying to treat it like a canal they owned.
Customs charge.
Exactly. But they lost on the much bigger point. The real poison pill in that treaty was that Colonel Pottinger was now to be permanently stationed in Sindh as the company's official representative.
A watchdog is in the hen house.
Permanently. And the Sharyar, the emirs, they were reluctant. Of course they were. They knew what this meant. But the British pressure was relentless. They framed it as, we just need an agent on the ground to make sure the trade runs smoothly, to handle any disputes over duties.
But in reality, it meant constant surveillance, constant interference.
It was the end of their true independence. From that moment on, there was always a British official at their court, whispering in their ear, reporting back to Calcutta. The friendship was now purely about the emirs facilitating British profit.
So that sets the stage for the third and final, most aggressive phase. The geopolitics comes roaring back, but this time it's not a shield, it's a sword.
Yes, the strategic and the commercial goals now merge perfectly. By the late 1830s, any lingering fear of France is a distant memory. It has been totally replaced by the paranoia of the Great Game.
The Russian specter.
The Russian specter. The new Governor-General Lord Auckland and everyone in London and Calcutta, they're convinced the Russians are on the march. They're seeing Russian envoys in Persia, in the Central Asian Khanates, and they are terrified of a Russian advance towards India.
And their solution is to get to Afghanistan first.
To get to Afghanistan first, they decide they absolutely must install a pro-British ruler in Kabul to act as a buffer state against Russia.
And to do that.
You have to move a massive army with thousands of troops, cannons, supplies, pack animals. The logistics are staggering. And there's only one practical way to get all of that from British India to the mountain passes of Afghanistan.
Through Sindh.
Through Sindh. The Indus River is the supply line. The roads through Sindh are the only viable route. The strategic mandate became crystal clear. To conquer Afghanistan, we first have to control Sindh.
So that old 1832 treaty that just gave them transit rights for merchants, that's completely useless to them now.
Utterly inadequate. You can't run a full-scale military invasion based on the goodwill of a foreign power. What if the emirs object? What if they raise the tolls? It's too risky. They needed total, unconditional, unhindered control.
So their military needs and their commercial desires were now perfectly aligned. Both required absolute control of the Indus.
And that means the emir's sovereignty, their right to charge duties, their very existence as an independent state was now officially a strategic liability.
So all the British needed was an excuse, a pretext to tear up the old treaties and take that control by force.
And they found one. Or rather, they manufactured one. It involved the Sikh ruler to their north, the very powerful Ranjit Singh. He captured a border town called Roshan.
Which was a genuine threat to the emirs.
It was. But instead of helping an ally, the British saw an opportunity. They immediately rushed in and offered the emirs protection from the Sikhs.
An offer they couldn't refuse.
An offer they never even asked for. They knew exactly what British protection meant. It meant occupation. But the British insisted. They argued the threat from Ranjit Singh was too great, that the emirs couldn't handle it alone. It was a classic protection racket.
And this leads directly to the Subsidiary Treaty of 1839. What did that force upon them?
It was the end. They were forced to sign it. And the terms were just crushing. First, they had to accept a permanent British resident, a political overseer, in their capital, Hyderabad.
So even more direct control.
Way more. Second, they had to surrender their entire foreign policy. They were no longer allowed to negotiate with anyone, not Ranjit Singh, not Persia, without British approval.
They're a vassal state.
In all but name. Third, they had to pay a huge annual sum for the privilege of having British troops stationed on their land to protect them.
And the final nail in the coffin.
The commercial one. They were forced to give up their right to levy any customs duties on the Indus River trade. That economic lever they had tried so hard to hold on to in 1832 was just gone. Stripped away.
So they lost their political sovereignty, their military autonomy, and their main source of revenue, all while being forced to pay for their own occupation.
That's it. In 1839, the transition was complete. Sindh's independence was sacrificed on the altar of the Great Game.
Which brings us to the final brutal act, the war in Afghanistan that this was all for. It goes horribly wrong.
Horribly wrong. A complete catastrophe. And throughout that war, from 1839 to 42, Sindh is just relentlessly exploited. It's a staging ground, it's a supply depot, it's a cash machine for the British war effort.
What else were they demanding from the emirs during this time?
The demands were endless. Provisions for the army, transport, camels, boats, forced labor. It was crippling the local economy. But the betrayal was so much worse than that. Using the war as an excuse, the British just started seizing territory.
In violation of all the treaties.
In total violation. They seized Karachi.
The main port.
The main port. They needed it for their sea-based logistics. They seized Shikarpur.
The big inland trade hub.
The key junction for the land routes. And they seized Bukhar, a fortress on the Indus, to control the river traffic. They systematically took the three most important strategic and commercial points in the entire country.
And they're still forcing the emirs to pay for the troops who are doing the seizing.
It's unbelievable, isn't it? The emirs are going broke paying for their own dismemberment. And of course, this creates huge resentment and hostility among the local population, which the British then turn around and use as proof. See? They're hostile. We need more troops, more control. It's this vicious, self-fulfilling cycle.
And then comes the news from Afghanistan in 1842. The British Army has been annihilated during the retreat from Kabul.
A total disaster, one of the worst defeats in British imperial history. And it shatters their prestige, their aura of invincibility. And this introduces the third and maybe the most urgent motivation for what happens next.
Restoring lost prestige.
Exactly. The new Governor-General, Lord Ellenborough, arrives in 1842, and he has one overriding mission. He needs a win. A quick, decisive victory to show everyone in India that the British lion still has teeth.
And Sindh, already weakened, occupied, and demoralized, is the perfect target.
It's the low-hanging fruit. It's the easy victory he needs to restore his and the empire's reputation.
Enter the man for the job, Sir Charles Napier. He replaces the previous resident, Outram, in 1842. What do the sources say about Napier?
The sources are not subtle. He is described explicitly as a bully who wanted war. He was not a diplomat. He was an aggressive, ambitious general who saw Sindh as his chance for glory and a promotion.
So his job isn't to manage the relationship, it's to end it.
His job is to find a pretext for annexation, and he does it in the most cynical way imaginable. He just starts sending reports back to Calcutta, falsely accusing the emirs of plotting against the British, of being treacherous,
Creating a paper trail.
creating a casus belli,
Ugh.
a reason for war. He knew the emirs were desperate, sure, but they were in no position to actually challenge the British military. He just needed the accusation to be on the record.
And this is where we get that quote. The most damning admission in this whole affair, from Napier himself.
It's stunning. In his private letters, he's brutally honest. He writes, and I'm quoting again, "We have no right to seize Sindh, yet we shall do so, and a very advantageous, useful, humane piece of rascality it will be."
Humane rascality. Let's unpack that. He's admitting it's a crime. He says, we have no right. He calls it rascality. So how on earth does he square that with calling it humane?
It's the ultimate colonial mindset, isn't it? The advantageous and useful parts are easy. It's useful for strategy, it's advantageous for commerce, but humane. What he means is that the outcome will be humane. He sincerely believes that British rule, with its laws, its order, its infrastructure, is so superior to the corrupt and inefficient rule of the emirs that conquering them is actually a favor.
A gift to the people of Sindh.
It's a gift. So the act itself might be a piece of rascality, a dirty crime, but the end result is progress. It's civilization. It's the moral logic that allows an empire to justify almost anything to itself.
And there's that other famous story about Napier that maybe sums up his attitude even better. The one-word telegram.
Ah, yes, the legend of Peccavi. The story goes that after he completed the conquest, he sent a one-word dispatch back to his superiors,
Peccavi.
which is Latin for,
I have sinned. Now, he probably never actually sent it, but the story stuck. It's stuck because it was true in spirit. It's the ultimate cynical boast. Yes, I broke the rules, I sinned against diplomacy, but I brought you home a victory and a new province, so what are you going to do about it?
So with Napier on the ground and Ellenborough wanting a victory, the final military campaign in 1843 is almost a foregone conclusion.
A complete foregone conclusion, and it was very, very short. The emirs were in an impossible position, their main cities were already occupied, their treasury was empty, and that Shahriyar leadership structure was just no match for a unified professional army. Where did the final battles take place?
They put up a brave fight, a last stand really, but they were defeated in two key battles. The Battle of Miani was first, and then the final blow was at the Battle of Dabo. And that was it. Organized resistance was over.
And the result. Formal annexation in 1843. The pretense is finally dropped.
Dropped completely. It's now officially part of British India. And Napier, ever the spin doctor, describes his war as the tale of the Afghan storm.
Trying to frame it as just a cleanup operation.
Right. Not a new aggressive war of choice, but just the inevitable, necessary conclusion to the failed Afghan campaign. It was very clever framing.
And what happened to Sindh administratively?
A few years later, in 1847, it was formally merged into the Bombay Presidency, so it lost its independent identity completely. It went from being a sovereign state ruled by the Talpuras to just another province administered from hundreds of miles away in Bombay.
So if we pull all these threads together for a final summary, for the listener trying to get a clear picture, what are the core reasons this happened?
It really boils down to three things, all intertwined. First, strategic defense. This was the foot in the door in 1809 and the final justification in 1843. The enemy changed from Napoleon to Russia, but the reason was the same. Sindh was the necessary path to Afghanistan, and they needed to control that path.
Okay, strategy is number one.
Second, commerce. This was the engine. The moment they realized the economic value of the Indus River, the entire relationship changed. They went from wanting to keep people out to needing to get in and control everything. It was about securing that trade route for themselves.
And the third, the immediate trigger.
Prestige. Plain and simple. The humiliating defeat in Afghanistan in 1842 created a political crisis. Lord Ellenborough needed a quick, easy win to restore the illusion of British invincibility, and Sindh was sacrificed to repair the empire's wounded pride.
The strategic fear opened the door, the commercial desire drove them through it, and the need to save face kicked it down.
That's a perfect summary. It's the toxic cocktail that proved fatal for the emirs of Sindh and their eternal friendship.
It is an absolutely incredible story. Just the raw duplicity of it traced over those 34 years. You see how this grand idea, the Treaty of Eternal Friendship, was just paper. How these big, distant geopolitical fears, Napoleon, Russia, were consistently used as a smokescreen.
A perfect excuse.
An excuse for what were, at the end of the day, very self-serving goals. Grabbing commercial assets and, frankly, soothing a bruised national ego.
And that really leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. How often in history does that happen? How often does this high-level anxiety about a global rival, a great game, serve as the perfect noble-sounding cover for much more basic motivations?
Like greed and vanity.
Exactly. The geopolitical fear provides the urgency, the public justification. But when you dig into the sources, you so often find the real drivers are commerce and the need to save face. So we'd encourage you to look for other examples. Other times, a territory was conquered, not because of some imminent threat, but simply because a powerful nation had suffered a humiliating defeat and desperately needed to look strong again.
The tail of the storm wagging the dog of conquest.
That's it. Exactly.
A fascinating and pretty sobering way to look at it. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.